Liz, it's great to have you on the School of Risk podcast. I have been looking forward to today, and I know you've got so much to share. We have so much in common. We are risk partners, and we know what we do. And I just thought, you know what, it's going to be great to have you on here because I know you do a few things in risk, and you're doing also a few other things outside. Let me let you do the talking. Please, Liz, introduce yourself and let our listeners know who you are and what you do, and we'll build the conversation from there.
Fab. Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to talk about all things risk, one of my absolute passions. So that's great. So by day, I'm a risk assurance partner for RSM. So I work in internal audit mainly, advising clients on how best to manage risk. Probably like you, what I like most about working with clients is risks are completely different, whoever you're talking to. So it could be safeguarding in a school, it could be drug control in the police, it could be how to do operations better in the NHS. So what I love about the type of work we are involved in is just that kind of spread, and every day is different, every challenge is different, and I love that. I manage a team of 50 people, so that obviously brings with it its own risks and its own challenges, but I really like the people side of the business. And by night, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about leadership and management issues, particularly really for women and the challenges in navigating the corporate career, and hopefully sharing some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the last 20 years of working in professional services, and lots of other industries. Just to kind of help kind of share that kind of perspective, really.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Let's talk about risk a little bit.
Oh, please, let's.
You're not going to escape that. I don't get a lot of people. You're the second person who I've had on the show that has come from a risk background. So I like to milk it a little bit when I have people like that on the show.
Of course.
What has been your experience? And I'm not talking about work. What has been your experience with risk? How have you found it? The whole idea of risk and managing risk before we take it into work and all that stuff. Just spend a little bit of time. I just want to hear your experience. I'll probably share mine with you, but the show is about you. Let me hear what you think.
Yeah, I think it's probably like most jobs, isn't it? Once you start doing this type of work, you just see risk everywhere, don't you? And you see kind of risk management, everywhere. And I think one of the challenges that most people have is how they understand risk and how they understand risk management, because it feels to many like a bureaucratic process or something that someone else does over there. But we all manage risk every second of our lives. That's what we do, don't we? If you're going to go on a journey, what do? You think about, have I got enough petrol? Do I know where I'm going? What will happen with parking? Do I need change? These are all like risk management decisions that we make on a daily basis. And also you'll see it in your friends and family you'll talk about something and their perspectives will be so different about the risk that something is. So you're having a chat with a friend yesterday and she's talking about quitting her job. Well, for some people, they'll be like, oh my God, have you got enough money in the bank? Like, what are you going to do? Like, they come from a very risk averse perspective on it. Whereas you'll get others who'll be like, yeah, absolutely, quit your job, see what happens, and much more risk taking. So every conversation you have almost in life has an element of a discussion about a risk or someone's perspective. You can kind of get like how they feel about risk, or how they come from so I had quite a traditional conservative upbringing, mainly to minimize risk. Like basically, don't stick your head up above the parapet, follow the traditional path of becoming an accountant. And those are all lessons that I learned in risk management really early on in my life. And I think many of us struggle to sometimes throw off those chattels of how you've been brought up. And we see this with entrepreneurs, don't we? Like, entrepreneurs are often from entrepreneurial families because they're risk takers, and that's seen as okay, and it's okay to fail, and it's okay to do those things. Where some others of us were brought up in backgrounds which were like, don't take risks, minimize those risks, save for a rainy day. These are all life lessons in what you should do about risk. And so I think it's really interesting once you study it like from a more academic perspective, professional qualifications and having worked with risk for 20 years, just how different organizations, different people will view the same situation very differently based on their experience and understanding of risk. So I think it is one of those things that you just see it everywhere now, and you can't not see it once you've seen it. So
absolutely, I 100% agree with you. And I've come to the understanding that risk is a philosophy, it's a way of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was talking to, who was I talking to earlier this week? Or was it yesterday? And I was having a conversation about how I started in risk. Do you remember the term risk champion?
Yes, I do.
That was how I started.
Which felt like a really thankless job as well. No one wanted to be a risk champion.
I know.
It's like being a fire warden, isn't it?
Exactly. That was how I started. And you know what? It's funny. A lot of the will I say new age risk managers will probably not have heard about this term risk champion because it's not being used as such anymore. But that's how I started more than 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? With everything I'm doing right now in risk and all that stuff, I'm still a champion for risk because I'm promoting risk. I want us to talk about risk every day, not as something bad.
Exactly. Yeah, you almost want to be a risk ambassador, don't you? Because
exactly.
A lot of people think, and we see it with clients all the time, with risk registers and stuff, they're trying to minimize risk all the time. And it's like, no, you don't want to do that. You need to be risk taking. You need to have those opportunities, but you need to do it in a calculated and managed way. But we're not trying to say don't do any, the biggest risk is not doing anything at all in most industries.
Exactly. Yes.
But we have got into this kind of definite moniker around it that risk is bad, and we don't often talk about the upside of risk.
Exactly, and we can't avoid risk. And you talked about that earlier. We can't. It's everywhere we go. You step out of your house, you are taking risk. Hey, can you see that behind me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the risk issue is so true. And I think
go on. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think the pandemic has kind of sort of emphasizes in some respects, because obviously there are a lot of people who have genuinely not wanted to leave their house, and we've become de-skilled in making those risk management decisions because we've not had to do it. We've been in our safe spaces, and we haven't left to go to work, or we haven't left to travel for a trip, or all those things, which kind of, like everything in life, the more you use something, the better you get at it, don't you? It's like a muscle. And I think over the next few years, there will be a readjustment period where people get used to taking some more risks. I think, we became an incredibly risk-averse society overnight by government edict, effectively, and unwinding that. And you can even see it, I'm sure, your listeners and kind of stuff, different people had different attitudes to risk during the pandemic. Like some people took risks that others wouldn't. And again, it's just a really good example of how it sort of is everywhere in the ecosystem. And we just don't always view it like that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, just going back to the pandemic, a lot of people that took risk during the pandemic, are laughing today because they've had a windfall, because where a lot of people were cutting back and, trying to be too safe, not take risk, you had some who took opportunities, saw opportunities and took those opportunities and, became overnight millionaires. I mean, it's not like they were not, I wouldn't say overnight because they must have been working before that time, but they saw opportunity and they jumped at it quickly and thought, you know what, that's it. And today they are doing so well. So it just shows you the two categories of people. I like to call them, you have the active risk takers and the passive risk takers. The active risk takers are the ones who are just forward thinkers, and they're just ready to jump at an opportunity. It's not as though they're not taking any calculated risk, but they are quick in their thought process. Whereas the passive ones take a little bit more time, overthink things sometimes, and I think overthinking things sometimes just does have its disadvantages. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen this kind of pattern, haven't we, over say the last 50 or 60 years around technology and infrastructure and investment and stuff. And as you say, those companies which will do the best are those companies which can be agile and dynamic and respond to what is happening and read the scenarios and kind of make a bet. Yes. Whereas those who sit back and say, I'd like more evidence, I want to, see how the next couple of years goes, they're the ones who get left behind. So, obviously the great Blockbuster's a great example of, they had an opportunity to buy Love Film, which then became Netflix.
Yes.
But because they made a proportion of their money from late fees, and this would do away with that, they said no. Well, obviously Blockbuster doesn't exist today.
It doesn't.
But Netflix rules the world. So and all the disruptors, Airbnb is the biggest hotel site, but doesn't own any hotels. Uber is the biggest taxi firm, but doesn't own any taxis. These are all disruptors who don't play by the status quo, but just take a risk on something that's not even a thing yet. It's just a concept or a principle. It's the fast movers. So I think, there's a kind of, and I think it's interesting in industry, because we're seeing slow and steady used to win the race. Like that was very much the sort of behaviors that were rewarded in companies, both on an individual executive level and then also, kind of overall for companies. But those aren't the behaviors now which actually win the race. And so we've got this kind of, I'm seeing it, a shift in cultures, management cultures, because the old ways of working no longer are fit for purpose, but we've still got this transference going on, and the people at the very top of organizations are the people who have worked for 40 years and have been kind of brought up in those methodologies, but actually the world around them is changing. We see it, the war on talent, don't we, the great resignation. It's because there's this disconnect between actually the people at the top of the organization and the way they want to run it, and then the people who work in the organization and the way they want it run. And we're seeing that, the authenticity gap and, all of those types of things. I think it's just becoming more and more obvious.
Yes. I mean, you manage about 50 or so people you mentioned earlier. How is the environment now post-pandemic in relation to working habits? Are people, I mean, obviously pre-pandemic, everybody comes to the office and all that stuff, and then you have people working from home. Now you have the hybrid nature, which you touched on, slightly. What is your experience in that? How is the return to work being taken?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So as you say, sort of pre-pandemic, most of my teams were out 80% of the time. So either at clients or in the office, maybe one day a week at home. And obviously that shifted to the last 2 years, it's been 100% at home pretty much.
Yeah.
And during that time, of that 50 staff, I've probably onboarded 20 people. So all they've ever known is this way of working when they work in my team. And quite a lot of our recruitment is at graduate level. So in fact, it's their first ever job. It's their first ever time in the workplace after leaving university. So they've had a very different experience over the last 2 years. And in some ways, so I personally think that it's been fantastic. It's like an industrial revolution overnight. So we went from, had I pitched a paper 3 years ago, which was like, the team needs to work at home all the time, there's absolutely no way that would have ever got through. But now that we've shown that it can work and there are lots of advantages, we're obviously now coming back to a bit more of a proportionate model. So 1 to 2 days probably in the office or at clients, and probably the remainder at home, but that will look different for different people in different weeks. For our junior colleagues, they absolutely need to be with people.
Yeah,
they don't know it, but they do.
They need motivation.
They need motivation. They need to know how you handle a difficult conversation, how you handle an awkward meeting, you learn by osmosis early on in your career. You don't realize you're learning, but you do. And just sitting in an office or going to a meeting at a client and seeing how a more senior member of the team handles something is really invaluable. And you just don't get that experience quite the same, in a remote environment. Yeah, there is a lot of what we're focusing on is needs of different people at different stages in their career. And for, lots of my team who say have been with the business 5-10 years, but have families, have other commitments, this level of flexibility has been quite life-changing for them. And, and we're keen to preserve the upside of that. So we've implemented like a lot more flexible working, even working weekends, like what fits around family life or whatever it happens to be. Like I did my master's during the pandemic, so actually for me it wasn't about childcare, but it was about I need to write this dissertation, or I need to do this thing. So it's just being reflective of where other people are. And I think the good thing is, not that we had it particularly in my team, but presenteeism has changed. I mean, we've now got digital presenteeism, which is not so good, like the constantly pinging Teams message or the Slack or the WhatsApp, and like that can feel. So I think we've got some new boundaries to manage. In a way, when you left the office, it was quite clear that you were signaling that I'm off now. I'm off now. Whereas at the moment, because we have all been working weird hours to accommodate other pressures, we need to kind of come back to some sort of medium, I think, on it. But I think that's no different from any other team that's kind of facing this challenge at the moment.
Absolutely. And I like what you mentioned about the flexibility you're giving your team, which is to also work weekends, just pretty much fitting around their lifestyle. And that's just that we have to be dynamic in this age.
Yeah.
And it's part of our own dynamic risk management, I would say.
Exactly.
Because,
So we've got someone in the team who wants to get up at 4:30 in the morning and train for a triathlon. Now that's not for most people, but if he wants to do that and start work early and finish at 3, so he can get another training session in, then absolutely we should be supporting that. So I think, I think what has been another big shift during the pandemic is just bringing yourself whole self to work. Or before, particularly for some members of the team, there was a very clear, like, I don't talk about my personal life in work, and there's kind of very strong boundaries, whereas obviously it's all melded slightly. Now we've been working from home, but I think what it does do is it allows people to be more authentic about
who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've definitely connected with, say, clients on a much more personal level over the last couple of years, because you like, oh, is that your dog or your child or your where's that picture from? And you've just been able to connect in a way that we wouldn't have done previously. So I think it has been many upsides. Obviously it's been kind of an incredibly difficult time for many, but there are some wins that have come out of this way of working.
Absolutely. And it does make working a lot more exciting, because I always say, when you leave your home, you don't leave a part of you behind. We try to suppress that, maybe suppress certain parts of who we are when we get to the office, but that's a conflict of
exactly.
self. We're having an internal conflict with ourselves. So when you create an environment that allows people to bring their whole selves to work, you connect with the individual. And when you connect with the individual, they become part of that entire, ecosystem of the organization they work within, and they're more productive.
Absolutely. And I think we've not only had a pandemic, we've had Me Too, we've had Black Lives Matter, we've had kind of like a lot of other movements which have forced conversations or forced, organizations to reflect on behaviors or, other elements that, again, I think has just been a really positive step forward to talk about being more authentic at work and being more, sharing culture or sharing experiences or sharing challenges. Because I just think that stuff, like particularly from a female perspective, wasn't always talked about before. And, again, that conversation's moved on significantly.
Absolutely. Just, I want to ask you this question, and I think you're probably the first person I'm asking this question, and I want to get your views on this. Do you think that the whole working from home situation as a result of the pandemic has affected companies financially in terms of the ability of people to be present at work and do work at home? At work. Do you think that whole shift affected productivity in any way?
Yeah, so I think it's all been, well, I wouldn't say all positive, but I think we saw many positives, both within our team, but also within all the clients that we work with. So obviously reduction in sickness, because actually people felt like, they wouldn't necessarily have traveled to go somewhere, but they could do a few hours at home or whatever. That obviously people absolutely should rest when they need to rest.
Yes.
But I think obviously we're doing business in a different way. So, before the train, and it's not just the cost, it's like the environmental impact as well. But we used to huge amounts of travel for what turns out for mainly unnecessary. Out it was mainly unnecessary. And that's the time for the individual, that's a cost, train tickets, petrol, whatever, and the environmental cost. So
the carbon footprint is a lot higher.
So much higher, and just wasted time as well. Like, if I had a 10 o'clock meeting, I'd get there at 9:30 to make sure I'd got there, and probably waste my time and have a coffee and blah blah blah. And it just so we've become a lot more efficient in our working practices. I think the downside is, though, it can feel quite relentless, and it can feel quite the same. So I think that for people who liked going out and about, the variety of being in a different place and seeing different people was good. And I think for some, being behind a screen, like 8-10 hours worth of Teams calls, is tough to sustain. So I think it's different challenges in different ways. But most of my organizations that I work with have been able to continue, and if not do more with less than they did pre-pandemic. So it just shows you probably how outdated the model was of going to an office. We used to go to an office because that's where work was.
Yes.
That's where your computer was, because we didn't have laptops, or that's where the typewriter was. And that's where and actually that doesn't work. And it does open up lots of other opportunities about you don't have to live close to work. So actually you can live your lifestyle in a different way, and you can travel, and you could do lots of other things. So I think we're only at the beginning of what the potential is for some of this, because for instance, travel, obviously we've not been able to travel, but now a digital nomadic life is a lot more like potential for professional services in a way that we just couldn't have envisaged that before.
Absolutely.
So I think, the next 2 years we'll probably have a settling period, won't we, where we find out what the new normal is, or the new medium, and see where we land. But again, I can only see it's going to be positive in terms of people's choices.
I think so. And I think one thing that this whole experience has taught us, from the pandemic and all that, is that we need to move forward. We just need to move forward, and everything and everyone, when I mean everything, I mean technology has advanced to make it possible for us to be dynamic in our work approach. And we as people just need to catch up with it and use it to create whatever it is we need to create. Yeah,
because like we wouldn't have done 2 or 3 years ago, Zoom calls were very few and far between, weren't they?
Exactly.
And then just overnight we had to embrace that technology and embrace that way of working. And definitely, like, I've been working on a project and we've been able to collaborate in a way that we never would have been. That project has got done a lot more quickly because we've been able to collaborate virtually through all the tools that we're all very used to using now. Whereas before, that would have been, we physically had to get people together, which would have taken weeks with people's diaries and logistics to line that all up. And we've just been able to move at pace. So I do think organisations will be moving a lot quicker now because they've got used to that. So that would be the other interesting thing to see, how quickly things can move forward.
Absolutely. Now, I know, yes, you got your full-time job, which you do, and you spend time outside of work doing other things. Tell our listeners about that. What got you into Simplification by Liz? What's that all about? And you've got some really, really, really valuable information there, I've seen. So let's know about that. Tell us about it and what got you into it and what you're aiming to achieve through that.
Yeah, and it's kind of a question of two halves. So there's a jokey half and there's a serious half to it. So the jokey half is, obviously during lockdown, we all had a lot more time and creativity, to be able to do stuff. And I'd always wanted to do YouTube, but hadn't really had the time to think about it and sort of get my head around the logistics. But during lockdown, particularly the first lockdown, my husband was furloughed, and he basically blew up on social media. He started doing these videos where he would jump around our house and change clothes and stuff. So it's not very highbrow, but it did become very popular. And so there was a part of me which was just like, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So I will get going and I will start this YouTube journey, which is something, as I say, I want to do. The kind of more serious part was just that.
Wait. You're missing out something. You said your husband blew up. How did he blow up? I think our listeners want to hear that.
Yeah. So he was just doing these videos. He did them for a few months. Like, he got, like friends and family were seeing them or whatever. And then he just got a couple of viral videos, and there is no rhyme or reason.
What platform was he on?
He's on TikTok. So he has about 700,000 followers now on TikTok, and he has about 250,000 on Instagram.
How many on Instagram?
About 250,000. So
wow. Was that over that period of time? Over the lockdown?
So over the lockdown. So basically he was doing it for about 9 months, moderately, so a few thousand followers, then had a couple of viral videos about last April, May, and just overnight sort of really started to put on like tens of thousands of people, until he grew to, like, as I say, like 700 odd thousand.
Why didn't I do that over the lockdown?
Oh, tell me about it. Well, because we were too busy working, that's why. Which is like my honest answer about why. So it just kind of happened by fluke. So again, another serious kind of answer to this is, what I love about social media is it's a leveler. So when I entered the workforce 20 years ago, which university you went to, which private school you'd gone to, neither of which I did. Like, I'm a comprehensive girl, who went to a local uni and worked her way through uni and stuff. And, the shoes you wore, the watch you wore, and the referrals you had helped open doors. Yes. Whereas someone like my husband, who is from an immigrant background, like limited education, has been able to elevate his status. And there's a great book called The Unfair Advantage by Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba, who talk about the different kind of different levers you can have to kind of basically be successful in life. But what social media allows people to do is it's as long as you have a phone, you can create content,
Yes.
and people, and you will find your audience and you will find your tribe. And I really like the fact that we are removing those social barriers of education and birth and logistics and all those other things that perhaps have held back previous generations. So I love that about it. And the other thing I love is, so my husband is 55 this year, and at 55 you can completely change your life. And I like that. I like the fact that, because again, like, we're a culture that rewards youth, and we're a culture that thinks that you have to like achieve a certain thing by a certain age to be successful. And actually, my husband had a very ordinary career for most of his life, and then this has just kind of happened. So I really like the idea that at any point in your life, you can take a risk, you can do a thing, and you can get rewards for it. And so, although I obviously take the mick mercilessly because it is just a bit of light entertainment, I do like loads of things about it in terms of what it says about our society. By contrast, though, obviously, my YouTube stuff is a bit more serious and a bit more career orientated. But I felt it was really important as a female partner to have a voice to share some of my experiences that wasn't necessarily, that was my own voice, basically, that wasn't tempered by brand or corporate values or what kind of background I had to have, or all the kind of things that happen when you work within big professional services organizations. And to be fair, they have been incredibly supportive of me doing it and haven't tried to, censor or change it at all. But it was a bit of a risk because no one else was doing it. As a brand new partner, putting your head up against a parapet and starting to make content, some of which is reasonably controversial in terms of, I talk about mansplaining, and I talk about heap eating, and I talk about unhelpful behaviors in meetings, and I talk about some of the experiences I've had.
But these are real things that happen in the workplace.
Absolutely, especially as a woman who came from a non-private school background. I walk into many rooms which are still dominated by white men who went to certain schools. Like, that is, still where I spend a lot of my time, which is absolutely great because I found my power and I found my voice. But there were points in my career where I hadn't done that growth, or I hadn't done that learning yet. And so I just felt really strongly that it was at that point where I'd made partner, and that it was like part of my kind of responsibility to help other women particularly, but anyone else who feels otherness, who walks into a room and doesn't see someone who they resonate with, and kind of and just kind of share some of the stuff that happens, because it's not just a female issue, it happens to lots of people. Exactly. So it's just part of the diversity conversation, I believe, and the inclusivity. However, as I said, the reaction from my firm has been amazing and better than I could have hoped for. And had I known, I would have taken the risk earlier and done this sooner. But right time, right place, it all comes together. So
absolutely, because I also, I mean, there are things I always say, if I knew what I know now, it'll be different now.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned about by the way, how long have you been partner at RSM?
So I made partner last April, so I've been a partner for about a year. I was a director for about 5 years before that. Thank you. Yeah. It's a bit like getting married, there's like a lot of build up and a lot of ceremony about it, but actually it's no different in the day to day. But there's a bit more kind of a legal framework around it. But was one of those career goals, obviously, I wanted to like tick off. Yes. Really good that I've been able to do that.
That's good. That's really interesting to hear. Now, you talked about, and I think a lot of women, a handful of women experience this, where they are having this challenge of being the only female in the boardroom and things like that. And it appears that you are still experiencing that. What's the spread? I mean, okay, let me take that question back. How does it feel being in that situation where you are maybe a minority in that sense, in relation to the amount of men you have in the boardroom being at that level?
Yeah, so
how do you deal with that challenge?
Yeah, it can often be more in client boardrooms, actually, to be honest. So like the boardroom that I sit in, within Risk Assurance, we're a fairly diverse bunch, and there's plenty of other women around. But quite often with clients, I might be the only person in an audit committee or in a board, and often sort of a bit younger as well. So I think it's being comfortable and confident about what your role is and what perspective you can offer. And I think when you work in risk and internal audit, you can ask some quite difficult questions and you can challenge in a way. But with most things in life, it's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it, isn't it? And it's about, so one of the things I've worked on is my impact and how I can get my point across in a way that will be received well. So I'm naturally, as you've probably told, I'm a bit like you, naturally high energy, naturally jazz handy and whatever. And sometimes that's a bit much and I have to tone it down. And I think that's the downside of, say, Teams and stuff, is I think it was much easier in an old-fashioned boardroom to read the room and see if your message was resonating. And I think that's harder in a virtual world. It's easier to ask questions now because the chat function and the hand function, and you can get brought into conversations perhaps easier than you might have done before. But actually knowing if your message is landing is quite difficult. So I think, and by no means am I an expert at it, but I think I've got better at. And I think one thing that women often have is really good emotional intelligence and really good ability to build rapport and understand other people's points of view. So I think it's like everything in life, it's leaning into your skills. And trying to, so the old-fashioned kind of view wasn't it, like, oh, work on your weaknesses because then you'll get better. And actually now it's like, no, just really play into your strengths. Your weaknesses will always be your weaknesses, as long as they're not completely detrimental. And I think this is like my whole thing about my career really, is the more I've been myself and been my authentic self and shared the views that I bring from my perspective and done them in the way that I do them, actually the more successful I've been. Like the more clients I've won, the more I've been promoted, the more I've been recognized. And I think if I could go back 10 years or 15 years, I'd just say to myself, just be you and be more of you. Rather than thinking that you've got to play a corporate role or you've got to hide behind a sanitized version of yourself. And of course,
I love that term. Oh my goodness.
Of course, you can't fully be yourself. Like, I don't rock up in pajamas.
A sanitized version of yourself. I love that.
But you know what I mean? Like,
I know what you mean. I like that. No, you're so right, because I used to be that way as well. I struggle not being myself, but sometimes you're forced to tone yourself down. Like even when I used to travel into London, when I was contracting back and forth and all that stuff, there were, even the way I dress, I loved my dressing to just reflect me. And sometimes someone has said to me once, you might come across a little bit intimidating. Why don't you just tone down your dressing a little bit? I'm like, no way.
Exactly.
No way. This is me. And I
love that saying, like, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And like that could have been in a position where you said, oh, actually, I will tone it down. And then you would have been basically taking on someone else's predispositions or conceived ideas about what's appropriate or what's not, or how you should be. And I just think, the more you can kind of resist that, and there's a lot of pressure. And particularly when you're earlier on in your career, you don't really know who you are, do you? Like at 25, I didn't know who I was going to be at 40. Like it's, there's life to grow. Isn't like that's the whole beauty of it. But I think, the more you can resist outside pressure to conform is much better.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to ask you to share, I was going to say 3, but I'm probably going to say 5.
Okay, so a challenge.
I'm going to say 5. I know you can do this. Now, I just want to hear a little bit more, and I think listeners want to hear this in terms of the value you offer through the content you share on your YouTube channel. First and foremost, what's the goal? What's the purpose of Simplification by Liz? What are you aiming to achieve?
I think it's just, so ultimate big picture, I'd like more equality, diversity and inclusion in all roles, particularly at senior levels, in all types of organisations, because I just genuinely believe diversity of thought is incredibly important. And
I think so.
And everyone to feel like they have a place and a home where they can be themselves and share their perspectives, and they are valid and they are listened to. So I think that's the kind of big goal. I think the way that I try and do that is by just sharing tips, tricks and hacks of like when I've been in situations, either what I've learned from like what I didn't do very well and or, if I could go back, what I would change, or some of the tips I've learned to manage some of those difficult situations. So if you're in a meeting and you don't feel like you're being heard, what can you do? If you're going to a meeting and you feel like it's pointless, what can you do to change that?
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where you feel like you're being talked down to by a colleague, what can you do?
Yes.
And so it's just some of those things that when I talk to, so I mentor quite a lot of women and other people and men, other people, but consistently there are common themes that of stuff that comes up from people just in terms of they're not quite sure how to handle situations. And the problem is often until you're in that situation, you don't know how you're going to react.
Yeah.
And so it's just trying to basically share some kind of knowledge and, in inverted commas, expertise about what I've done to kind of get to a certain level, get to be effective in my job, and be effective with clients and things, while still navigating internally those challenges about, okay, God, like, how do I do this? Or, if I feel like I'm being talked down to, how do I respond in a way that I'm not just going to shout at him or seem, irrational or whatever. And how you can then use that. It's, again, it all comes back to impact, really. Like, basically, how can you get the impact you want? So it's probably more than 5 or less than 5, but that's kind of like the genesis of it.
That's good. I just want to mention that it was one of your YouTube videos that got my attention to you, and it wasn't just the content you were sharing, but it's also you owned it in terms of you were speaking from a place of experience and you were talking from a point of authority, knowing that you know what you're saying, this is what will benefit, the viewers of that video. And coincidentally, we have a mutual friend who happens to be also a partner as well as your dad. I can't remember. Yeah. He's also a partner at the company you work for. When he used to go for his beers and drinks event in London. So and that's the power of putting out what we know, because if you had left all that information that you have and that value you have, just in your head without sharing it, we would not be having this conversation.
And that's the other thing I love about it, is just by putting yourself out there, by taking a risk. Like, I didn't need to start a YouTube channel, and in fact it was quite risky to do so professionally and stuff, but as you say, it's connections like these, it's conversations like these that make it worthwhile. Because, or just if I get a comment, someone saying, oh my God, this really helped, like that's fantastic. Exactly. Because and also I think that personal brand is actually becoming incredibly important in the workplace in a way that it wasn't a few years ago. And I think social media is, again, a great way of being able to establish what your personal brand is without having to go and meet thousands of people individually. It's just a really effective way of creating that. And I have clients or audit committee members or trustees or whoever now, and it's a talking point. It is something that you can have a chat about. Oh, I saw a video, or I saw you did this. And it's just a really good way, again, of building rapport and connections with people. And I think that's what we're in the business of doing, is just kind of connecting with other humans. That's the fundamental of life, isn't it?
Yeah, you mentioned you mentor women. Is that in work or out work, or both?
A bit of both, and it's not just women. It's I mentor men as well. It's just, I always think about the women are always a lot more feel they have a lot more challenges than the men do sometimes. So inside and outside of work, people who've either seen me through YouTube and approached me that way, or several people internally in my firm. And again, I really love that side, because it's sharing that knowledge and experience and trying to help the next generation come through and kind of come to positions of power.
Yes. Listeners, you have to reach out to Liz Wright, so she can mentor you. If you need a mentor, ladies, gentlemen, reach out to Liz. The energy I'm getting from this woman is, oh my goodness. And I could keep you here for another hour, but I'm not going to do that.
We could chat for hours, can we?
I know. No, that's good. Now, what are 3 things you want our listeners to take away from this, conversation we've had? Just 3 things that you want them to remember that is of value that would impact their lives.
Yeah, so I think the first...
Or career, whichever way.
Yeah, everything. So I think the first point is the one we started on, which is just risk is everywhere, and it's up to you how you choose to view that and take it on, and hopefully become more risk-taking and build out a fuller life, whatever that looks like for you and your individuals. Yes. I always think of the Brené Brown phrase, which is just show up and be real. And if I was to give anyone advice, personal, career, whatever, if you're ever considering what should I do about this, or how do I react to it, just show up and be real. And I think even if it doesn't go well, at least you've been true to yourself. And that's easier to stand behind when perhaps I haven't done that and I've played a part I thought I needed to play or said the things I needed to say, but actually that didn't have a great outcome, and also I didn't feel very like authentic, or I didn't feel like I'd done that. So I think it's always better to be brave and to stick your neck out and see what else comes of it. And then I think the third thing is, we're always learning, aren't we? And the world's moving. So I think, just I'm a great believer in kind of, as you say, mentoring, coaching, like just voracious reading, like anything you can do just to kind of give yourself a different perspective or to bring a different idea, I just think is a really good way of being able to navigate this challenge that we call life, especially after the last couple of years.
Absolutely. I love that honest advice you just, while you was, giving those, points, I thought about one person that I'm going to share the link to, because they need to hear what you just said.
Fab, thank you.
Yeah, but obviously it's going to be heard by more than one person. So
I mean, one is enough, right?
One is enough, but I know
one person's life, that's all you need.
Exactly.
Right?
It's going to be heard by thousands as time goes on. Yes, for sure. Now, it's been a pleasure having you here, Liz. I usually end the show by asking one question, and this is what I call the superhero question.
Okay, yeah.
Hey, and the question is, who's your favorite superhero? And what is it you have in common with them that makes them your favorite person?
Okay, so it's not technically a superhero, but she is in my eyes. So okay. Oprah is my superhero.
Why?
Just because the amount of adversity she overcame, which is in common with a lot of superheroes. They often come from backgrounds which are they're orphans or they've had an incredibly hard start in life. And she has revolutionized, first Black female billionaire, revolutionized daytime TV, just so many firsts that she was kind of the pioneer for, and bringing kind of emotional intelligence conversations into the fore. So it would be my superhero. So I think, actual superheroes I'm probably not so good at.
What do you have in common with her?
I would like to think I have in common with her the ability to be brave in my own voice and back myself. But I think that's something that I've had to learn. I think she had it from a much earlier age, but
you are certainly brave in your own voice. I feel that. I feel the energy, and that's wonderful. And you are the first person on the show. If I'm wrong, please forgive me, whoever it is. But I think you are the first person on the show to have mentioned a real character. Most people usually go with the fictional
Marvel ones or whatever,
Marvel and all that stuff, which is fine. And but I like the fact that you went for a real life. Actually, no, yes, someone said Jesus was their superhero, which is also
a very good one.
Exactly. Good one as well. And I love this superhero question because we all learn from them. We all learn from people, and we have people that we look up to, that we aspire to be like or learn from them, and so on and so on. And I love the fact that you brought up Oprah Winfrey, because she's a phenomenal woman. And like you said, she's overcome a lot, and she speaks from her own, voice as well. So amazing. Liz, if people want to get in touch with you and reach out to you, how do they find you? Where can they reach you? And please share that information, because I'm sure that after listening to this, they want to know you, they want to hear more from you, and probably even want to, get you to mentor them.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah, please feel free to reach out. So my website is www.lizwright.co.uk. So that's quite easy. And my YouTube channel is Simplification by Liz Wright, or find me on LinkedIn or any other social media platform. And I would, love to connect.
Fantastic. You better, listeners, please, listeners and all the risk takers out there, please check out Liz Wright, Simplification by Liz on YouTube. The content she has on there is phenomenal, and you're going to learn, particularly if you're in the workforce and you are going through a number of challenges, you'll find answers on Liz, platform on YouTube. Liz, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this with me. And we're going to keep talking from time to time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd look forward to it. Yeah, thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for spending the time with me and my guest Liz Wright on this episode. Do you remember what Liz said about how your perception of risk can affect your risk-taking and decision-making? Save this episode as one of your favorites so you can remind yourself of some of the valuable information that can help you in your risk-taking in life, career, or business. Remember, new shows drop every week, so make sure you click the follow or subscribe button to be notified when they are released, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch full video podcasts of some of our episodes. This episode is also available to watch on Spotify, so enjoy this new addition to our podcast lineup. I am your host, your risk champ, Chizibele Gudo, here on the School of Risk podcast. Until next time, risk it until you win it.